Maple Ridge was the kind of town that most people would describe as sleepy. Nestled on the outskirts of a bustling city, it was a quiet suburban haven with tree-lined streets, cozy homes, and neighbors who knew each other by name. It was the place where kids played in the yard, where barbecues were a weekend tradition, and where nothing ever really changed. For years, the town had been a picture-perfect representation of suburban life. Life was simple, predictable, and that was how the people of Maple Ridge liked it. But today, the serenity of Maple Ridge would be shattered. The small brick town hall, a building that had witnessed countless debates over zoning issues, school policies, and local elections, was packed to the brim. People shuffled in, exchanging hushed conversations, but there was an air of unease hanging over the room. Sarah Monroe, a local historian and single mother, sat near the back with her 10-year-old son, Ethan, fidgeting in her seat. The community was abuzz with rumors of an emergency town meeting, but no one knew exactly what it was about. Sarah had heard whispers of an environmental hazard, but that didn't make sense. Maple Ridge was surrounded by green forests, and the air and water had always been clean. As the clock struck 7:00 p.m., Mayor Dan Griffin stepped up to the podium at the front of the room. The usual warm smile he wore when greeting his constituents was nowhere to be found. His face was pale, his shoulders tense. The crowd fell into a heavy silence as he cleared his throat and looked out at the sea of expectant faces. Sarah noticed his hands gripping the sides of the podium with a nervous strength, his knuckles turning white. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice." The mayor's voice cracked slightly as he began. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I must tell you that due to unforeseen circumstances, we are being forced to make some difficult decisions." He paused for a moment, swallowing hard, as if the weight of what he was about to say was suffocating him. "After months of testing, the government has discovered significant environmental contamination beneath our town," he said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. The room buzzed with confusion, and murmurs erupted across the hall. "Our soil and water have been compromised at dangerous levels. The contamination is widespread, and the situation has become critical." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Maple Ridge, the place where she had grown up, where she had raised Ethan, was being destroyed, but the mayor wasn't done yet. "We've been advised by federal agencies and environmental specialists that this contamination poses a severe health risk." The mayor continued, his voice growing more distant. "It is no longer safe for us to remain here. The town will be demolished. But there is some good news. We've been working closely with the government to ensure that every family is relocated to a new town, one that will offer the same homes, same schools, and same community spirit you've come to know. The relocation is already in motion. All of you will be moved to a new development just 47 miles north of here, in a town called Elm Grove." The word Elm Grove hung in the air, and for a moment, Sarah felt dizzy. It sounded so clinical, so far removed from the life they had here in Maple Ridge. The mention of relocation was jarring. Sarah's mind raced with questions. Why had they waited so long to tell the town? How had they missed the contamination for so many years? What would happen to their homes, their businesses, their history? "Now, I know that this news is difficult to process," Mayor Griffin went on, his voice trembling slightly. "I understand that this may feel like the end of something important, but I assure you this is the beginning of something better. Elm Grove will be just like Maple Ridge. Same homes, same streets, same everything. I know it won't feel the same, but it's the best option we have right now. The government has made arrangements to make this transition as smooth as possible. All your properties and mortgages will be transferred to the new homes. We will provide moving assistance, and you'll have a fresh start." The room fell into stunned silence. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others exchanged anxious glances. It felt like the floor beneath them was crumbling, but no one knew how to react. Sarah looked down at Ethan, who was staring blankly at the floor, his small hand tightly clutching hers. She could feel his unease, his confusion. This wasn't the life they had planned. It wasn't the life he deserved. Then, a voice from the back of the room broke the silence. "What about our businesses?" Tom Bradley, a local contractor and longtime resident, stood up, his face contorted with frustration. "What about our homes? You can't just take everything from us and tell us to start over in some cookie-cutter town. What's really going on here, Mayor? Why the secrecy? What aren't you telling us?" The crowd erupted into murmurs of agreement. People stood, voices overlapping, anger and fear bubbling to the surface. Sarah's heart raced. She could feel the tension in the room, the growing sense of betrayal. No one wanted to believe that Maple Ridge, their home for generations, was being erased from existence without a clear explanation. It felt wrong. It felt too sudden. They deserved more than this. The mayor raised a shaky hand, attempting to calm the crowd. "Please, everyone, please," he said, his voice strained. "I understand that this is a lot to take in, but the situation is out of our hands. The federal government has already made the decision. We have to comply. But what happens to our memories?" Sarah whispered to herself. She glanced around the room, noticing the same look of shock and helplessness on the faces of her neighbors. This wasn't just about moving houses. It was about losing everything, their identity, their past, the life they had built here. The meeting dragged on, but Sarah barely registered the words being spoken. She was lost in thought, grappling with the reality of what was happening. The thought of uprooting everything she knew, everything she loved, was unbearable. But the truth was there, unspoken in the air. This wasn't a choice. It was a command. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah stood with Ethan and made her way toward the exit. The air outside felt colder than usual. People were leaving in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, unsure of what would come next. But one thing was certain: Maple Ridge would never be the same again. The morning after the town hall meeting, the first rays of dawn filtered through the heavy curtains of Sarah Monroe's living room, casting a muted light across the room. She sat by the window, Ethan still asleep in his bedroom down the hall. The house, which had always been her sanctuary, now felt foreign. The walls seemed to hum with an unsettling energy, as if the very foundation of the place was already in the process of disappearing. The once familiar scent of old wood and books, her late husband's favorite smell, now felt suffocating. The place that had witnessed every milestone of her life with Ethan, the first steps, the first words, the birthday parties, the quiet evenings spent reading stories together, felt like it was slipping through her fingers, like sand in an hourglass. How could she pack up a lifetime of memories in boxes? How could she leave behind the very house that had cradled her family's history? Sarah took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she folded a stack of clothes into a cardboard box. There was no choice. She had to go. The government had made sure of that. The trucks were already here, rumbling down Main Street, their engines roaring like distant thunder. Sarah could hear them even from inside her home. The military had arrived to oversee the relocation, taking charge of the entire process, handling it with the cold efficiency of an operation that couldn't be questioned. Everything had been arranged. Everything was already set in motion, but something inside her refused to accept it. She glanced over at the old family photo on the mantel. Her husband's face smiled back at her, frozen in time. He had passed away a few years ago, leaving behind a legacy in the form of a small-town history book, one she had promised to finish writing for him. He had loved Maple Ridge, every brick, every street, every tree. Sarah had grown up here, and now she was supposed to let it go, just like that, her thoughts wandered back to the previous evening's meeting. The mayor had been clear. The contamination beneath the town was beyond repair. A vague, nameless threat that the authorities had done their best to shield them from for years. The more Sarah thought about it, the more she felt there was something off about it all. It didn't add up. Why had it taken so long for anyone to notice? Why hadn't they been given any more information? It was too tidy, too controlled. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being lied to. The air in the room seemed to thicken as she finished packing the last of her clothes into the box. She looked over at the old town history books stacked by her desk, remnants of a life now being forcibly uprooted. A strange pull tugged at her chest, and her gaze fell on the dusty old keys to the Maple Ridge Historical Society. They were kept in the small wooden drawer by the kitchen table, a place she hadn't visited in years. She hadn't needed to. Her husband's dream, her dream, had always been to preserve the town's history. The library and archives were a labor of love, something that connected her family to the generations that came before them. The old building stood at the heart of Maple Ridge, a place filled with the stories of their ancestors, waiting to be uncovered. She had spent countless hours there, browsing the old dusty shelves, collecting stories of the town's founding, and keeping alive the memory of a community that had built itself on the ideals of family and unity. To leave it behind felt wrong. The unease that had been simmering in her chest for hours flared up once more. She couldn't just leave without understanding why this was happening, why the town was being erased. And why now? The records in the archives might hold the answers she needed. The books had always whispered secrets, small details of the past that people had long forgotten. Perhaps there was something hidden there, something that could explain the sudden decision to relocate the town, something more sinister than the mayor was letting on. Without another thought, Sarah grabbed the keys from the drawer and slipped them into her pocket. She moved toward the door, hesitating for a moment as her eyes wandered over the living room once more. A deep ache settled in her chest. The packing wasn't finished, but it didn't matter. It was hard to know what to pack when the life you had was vanishing before your eyes. The sound of military trucks passing outside rumbled through the house, making the windows rattle. Sarah shut the door softly behind her, locking it with a finality she didn't want to acknowledge. The streets of Maple Ridge, once so familiar, now felt eerily empty. The usual hum of daily life was gone, replaced by the clatter of army vehicles and the distant sounds of soldiers barking orders. The streets were lined with boxes and belongings, hastily packed by residents who were doing their best to comply with the orders given. Yet there was an undercurrent of resistance in the air, a quiet rebellion that Sarah could sense from the way people averted their eyes when she passed them. It was as if the very soul of the town was being torn away, and everyone knew it. The library stood at the far end of Main Street, a stone's throw away from the old town square. It was a grand building, built in the early 1900s, its stone facade weathered by time, and its large windows reflecting the light of a setting sun. The old oak trees that lined the path leading to the entrance had grown tall and strong, their branches swaying in the breeze like silent sentinels. Sarah walked towards the building, her steps quickening as she neared the entrance. The door creaked when she pushed it open, the familiar scent of old paper and ink filling her nostrils. Inside, the library was dark and still, the dusty shelves casting long shadows across the room. The dim light from the windows filtered in, illuminating the rows of books that lined the walls. It had been years since Sarah had spent time here, but it felt like coming home. This place, with its history and stories, was the heartbeat of Maple Ridge. The thought of it being abandoned, its walls hollowed out, left a bitter taste in her mouth. She walked past the rows of bookshelves, stopping in front of the old records room. The key in her hand felt heavy, its weight pressing against her palm. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was filled with stacks of papers, files, and boxes, each containing a piece of the town's past. Sarah moved to a desk in the corner, where she had once spent countless hours researching the history of Maple Ridge. She sat down, the chair creaking under her weight, and began to sift through the papers. The records were scattered, the file folders unorganized, but she knew exactly what she was looking for. As her eyes skimmed over the old documents, she found what she was searching for: an old map of the town's founding. It was a hand-drawn map dated back to the early 1800s. Something about it caught her eye. The land beneath Maple Ridge, the site where the town had been built, was marked with a symbol, one that was familiar, but Sarah couldn't quite place it. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines of the symbol on the paper. It was a sigil, a mark of something ancient, something powerful. Her heart skipped a beat as she pieced the details together. The map was more than just a history of the town, it was a warning. A warning about the land itself. The unease in her chest grew. The land wasn't just contaminated by some environmental hazard. It was something much worse. The drive to Elm Grove had been long but uneventful, a journey that felt like it was meant to distance them from everything they had ever known. The military convoy had escorted them for miles, cutting through winding roads that eventually gave way to the vast, open expanse of the new town. As Sarah Monroe drove alongside the convoy, she couldn't shake the heavy weight pressing down on her chest. The streets of Maple Ridge had slipped away, and with each passing mile, she felt further from home. She wasn't sure what she expected Elm Grove to be, but it certainly wasn't this. At first glance, Elm Grove seemed like a town straight out of a magazine ad. The homes were neatly spaced, with manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. The streets were wide and perfectly paved, with freshly planted trees lining every block. The houses themselves were carbon copies of those they had left behind in Maple Ridge, identical in every way, from the shape of the rooftops to the arrangement of windows. The park was large, its playground gleaming under the afternoon sun, and even the community center was spotless, sitting at the heart of the town like a centerpiece of perfection. "Well," Sarah said quietly, glancing over at Ethan, who had been unusually silent since they arrived. "At least the place looks nice." Ethan, still gripping the seatbelt tightly, didn't respond. His usual exuberance was gone. His once vibrant personality, always full of curiosity and chatter, had evaporated. His eyes were fixed on the window, but there was no wonder in them. Just silence. The lively boy who had been so full of energy in Maple Ridge now seemed distant, lost in thought. His fingers curled around the hem of his hoodie, a small sign that he was holding on to something, though Sarah wasn't sure what. They drove past a row of identical houses, stopping in front of one that looked almost exactly like their old home. Sarah had expected something to feel different, something to break the illusion, but it was perfect, too perfect. "Here we are," she said, her voice hollow, betraying her inner turmoil. "This is home now." The inside of their new house was just as immaculate as the outside. The walls were freshly painted in neutral tones, the floors polished to a glossy sheen. Every detail had been thought of. The kitchen was fully stocked with new appliances, the living room furnished with sleek, modern furniture. It looked like something out of a design magazine, sterile and impersonal. Sarah set down her bags in the hallway and looked around, a sense of unease creeping in. It was like walking into a dream, but not the kind that felt comforting. It felt more like a trap, a carefully constructed illusion. "I'll start unpacking," Sarah said, forcing a smile. She tried to shake the feeling of dread clawing at her chest, but it clung to her like a shadow. She started with the kitchen, unpacking plates and silverware, putting everything in its place. But as she did, she couldn't shake the sensation that something was off. The house was too quiet, too perfect. There were no creaks in the floorboards, no sounds from the street outside, just an eerie silence that settled over everything. Ethan had wandered into the living room and was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. His eyes flicked to Sarah, but he didn't speak. He hadn't said much since they left Maple Ridge, and it worried Sarah more than she cared to admit. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently, walking over to him. He shrugged without looking up, his gaze still fixed on the screen. "I don't know," he muttered. "It's fine, I guess." Sarah sat beside him, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "You don't have to pretend, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. We'll make this place our home." But even as she said it, Sarah knew that wasn't true. The town might look the same on the outside, but something felt wrong. It was as if they had been transported into a place that was somehow too perfect to be real. She wasn't sure what it was, whether it was the silence, the emptiness in Ethan's eyes, or the strange feeling that the walls themselves were watching her, but it unsettled her. That night, the quiet that had enveloped Elm Grove deepened. The house seemed to settle around her, and Sarah could hear the subtle creaks of the floorboards above her head. She climbed into bed, pulling the covers tightly around her, trying to push the strange thoughts from her mind. But the silence was deafening. It pressed in on her from all sides, making her feel small and insignificant. The house felt too empty, too still, like it was waiting for something, waiting for them to become part of it. The lights flickered above her, briefly casting strange shadows on the walls. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had seen that before, back in Maple Ridge when the house would settle in the middle of the night. But this was different. This felt wrong. She lay there for a while, listening to the silence. She could hear the occasional sound of an engine in the distance, the faint hum of a passing car on the highway, but it was all so distant, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The air felt heavier, thicker, like something was waiting just beyond her reach. As the hours ticked by, Sarah finally fell into a restless sleep, but the peace didn't last long. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke suddenly, the feeling of unease still lingering like a cloud over her. She sat up, the moonlight streaming through the window, casting an eerie glow across the room. She rubbed her eyes, trying to shake off the sleep that clung to her mind. But then she heard it. A faint whispering. Soft, barely audible, like voices echoing through the walls. Sarah's heart raced. She froze, straining her ears, trying to understand the sounds. They weren't coming from outside, they were coming from inside the house. From the walls, it was as if the house itself was speaking to her. The whispers were unintelligible at first, a soft murmur that blended into the background. But as Sarah focused, she could make out a few words, her name mixed in with phrases she couldn't quite understand. "Sarah, come back, remember?" A shiver ran down her spine. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, perhaps the wind or the house settling. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. It felt like a memory trying to surface, a voice trying to make its way into her mind, one she couldn't fully grasp. She swung her legs out of bed, the cold floor sending a chill up her spine. Ethan was still asleep, his form curled tightly under the covers. Sarah stood there for a moment, her heart hammering in her chest, before she slowly made her way to the door. The house felt even colder now, and the whispering continued, like it was coming from the very walls themselves. She crept down the hallway, the dim light from the kitchen casting long shadows across the floor. As she approached the living room, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The whispering seemed to grow louder now, more distinct. It was as if the house was alive, pulsing with something dark and hidden. She stood frozen in the doorway, staring into the empty room. The TV was off, but the whispering persisted. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like they were trying to speak. It was as though the house was trying to tell her something, or maybe it was trying to claim her. "Ethan?" Sarah called softly, but her voice felt strange in the empty room, hollow, as if it didn't belong. No answer. She stepped into the living room, her breath coming out in quick, shallow gasps. The whispers were now louder, more urgent, and Sarah could feel them pressing in on her, urging her to listen, to understand. But the words were still unclear, slipping away from her grasp like sand. Her gaze darted to the walls, to the ceiling, as if expecting something to jump out at her. But there was nothing, just shadows and whispers. Her heart thudded in her chest as she backed toward the hallway. As Sarah climbed back into bed, she tried to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She pulled the covers tighter around her, her eyes locked on the shadows dancing on the walls. The town may have looked like Maple Ridge, but nothing about it felt the same. It was hollow, and Sarah knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong. Days passed since Sarah and Ethan had arrived in Elm Grove, and the unsettling feeling of being trapped in a place that wasn't quite right only deepened. The town was everything the government had promised: identical homes, pristine parks, perfect streets. But there was something about the air here, a stillness that gnawed at Sarah's nerves. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had been placed in a replica of their old lives, as if Maple Ridge had been duplicated and emptied of everything that made it theirs. It was like stepping into a dream that didn't belong to her. Sarah's unease grew stronger with each passing day. She spent hours in the small library of Elm Grove, poring over maps and old records. She had become obsessed with the history of the town, searching for anything that could explain the strange occurrences she had been feeling. The more she dug, the deeper the mystery seemed to go. One afternoon, while leafing through a stack of old town records, Sarah came across a set of documents from the town's original settlement. Elm Grove wasn't the first town on this land. In fact, it was built on the remains of an old settlement that had existed long before Maple Ridge. The early settlers, it seemed, had abandoned the area under mysterious circumstances. There were no records of the exact cause, just vague references to disappearances and unexplained phenomena. The original settlement had been wiped out, its people vanishing without a trace. But there was something else that caught Sarah's eye: an old journal entry from one of the settlers describing strange symbols carved into the ground, marks that were said to have summoned something that should never have been disturbed. The journal entry was faded and fragmented, but the symbol described sounded eerily familiar. It was a mark similar to the one Sarah had seen earlier on a map of the town, the same symbol that had been etched into the doorway of her home in Maple Ridge just before the relocation. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had dismissed it before as nothing more than a coincidence, but now she wasn't so sure. She could feel the pull of the mystery deepening, drawing her further into its web. As she continued to read, the quiet murmurs of the town began to fade into the background, and her obsession with the town's origins consumed her. The whispers she'd heard in the walls of her new home, the strange behavior of Ethan, it all felt connected. But to what? It was late that evening when Sarah decided to visit her best friend, Lisa. Lisa had been one of the few people Sarah had managed to get close to in Elm Grove, despite the overwhelming sense of alienation. They had always shared an unspoken bond. Both were history buffs, both had a deep love for their small-town roots. Sarah needed someone to talk to share her growing concerns about the town's past. But when she knocked on Lisa's door, there was no answer. She knocked again, a little harder this time, and then tried the door. To her surprise, it was unlocked. Sarah hesitated before pushing it open, a sense of unease rising in her chest. It was unlike Lisa to leave the door unlocked, especially after dark. The moment she stepped inside, she felt the weight of the silence. It was too quiet, too still. The usual warmth of Lisa's home, filled with laughter and conversation, was absent. Instead, the air felt dense and heavy, almost suffocating. "Lisa," Sarah called softly, stepping further into the house. She moved through the living room, glancing around. The furniture was in place, but everything felt oddly arranged. The cushions on the couch were fluffed to perfection, the floor spotless, almost unnervingly so. Sarah noticed the strange shine on the wood surfaces, as if the entire house had been recently polished, too recently. She made her way to the kitchen, but Lisa wasn't there either. She stood in the doorway for a moment, staring at the empty space, and then her gaze fell to the counter. A bottle of cleaning solution lay on the counter, next to a rag that had clearly been used but left in a hurried manner. There was a faint smell of bleach in the air, and the floor, though clean, gleamed unnaturally. Sarah's stomach turned as she wondered if Lisa had been cleaning obsessively, as if trying to scrub away something she couldn't see or something she was afraid of. Her heart racing, Sarah called out again. "Lisa, are you here?" She turned toward the hallway and froze. At the end of the hallway, she saw a figure standing in the dim light of Lisa's bedroom. Lisa, but she was standing perfectly still, facing the wall. Her posture was stiff, her hands at her sides. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had never seen Lisa like this, so still, so lifeless. It wasn't like her to stand motionless in the dark like that. "Lisa?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. The figure didn't move. It was as if Lisa didn't hear her. Or perhaps, as Sarah feared, she didn't even recognize her anymore. Sarah took a hesitant step forward. The silence was suffocating, and with every inch she moved closer to Lisa, she felt a growing dread settle in her stomach. The closer she got, the more she noticed something. Lisa's skin was unnaturally pale, her hair limp and flat. She looked like a mannequin, rigid and unblinking. Sarah reached out and touched her shoulder. Lisa flinched violently, her body jerking away from Sarah's touch. It startled Sarah so much that she stumbled back. Lisa's head turned slowly, her eyes wide and glassy. She stared at Sarah, but there was no recognition in her gaze. It was as if Lisa wasn't even there anymore. Her mouth moved, but the words that came out were slow, mechanical, almost robotic. "Sarah, everything's fine," Lisa murmured in a monotone, her voice distant and hollow. "Everything will be fine. You just need to clean, Sarah. Clean the house. Clean everything." The words sent a chill through Sarah. This wasn't Lisa. This was something else. Something was happening to the people in this town, and it was getting worse. They weren't just relocating, they were being transformed. "Lisa, what are you talking about?" Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. "You're not yourself, you need help." But Lisa only smiled, a strange, unblinking smile, before turning away and walking toward the hallway. Sarah watched in disbelief as her best friend moved stiffly, like a puppet on strings. Without saying another word, Lisa disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Sarah stood frozen, a feeling of dread flooding her senses. She was afraid to move, but she had to. She had to find out what was happening. She quickly moved into Lisa's bedroom and turned on the light, her heart racing as she scanned the room. Her eyes fell on the doorframe. There, carved into the wood, was the same symbol, the one she had seen in the town records, the one she had read about in the old journals. It was unmistakable. The same symbol that had been etched into the old settlement. The same symbol that had marked the beginning of the town's dark history. And it was now carved into Lisa's door. The morning after Lisa's strange behavior and the chilling discovery of the symbol, Sarah woke up feeling as though she were living in someone else's nightmare. The sun had barely risen, but the unease that gripped her chest was overwhelming. Something was happening to the people in Elm Grove, something that had ties to the town's forgotten history. And Sarah couldn't ignore the pull to uncover the truth. Lisa's behavior had only been the beginning. The whispers she had heard in the walls, the unnerving silence that hung over the town, and now Lisa's mysterious disappearance, all of it pointed to something far darker than Sarah could have ever imagined. The perfect facade of Elm Grove, the identical houses, the pristine streets, was nothing more than a mask, hiding the ancient evil buried beneath it all. Sarah had to know what had happened here before, what had caused this place to be abandoned once, and what was bringing it back now. And so, she found herself once again walking the streets of the town, but this time, her destination was the archives. The Elm Grove Town Archives was an old, unassuming building tucked away on a quiet corner of the square. It was the kind of place people rarely thought to visit, a building lost among the modern developments that had sprung up around it. The archives, hidden in the back of a small public library, were filled with records and town histories. Sarah had visited it before, mostly for research when she first moved to the town, but today it felt like the last place of refuge. If there were any answers, they would be here, buried within the yellowed pages and forgotten documents. As she pushed open the door, the smell of old paper and dust greeted her, filling her lungs with the familiar scent of the past. The wooden floors creaked under her feet as she stepped inside, the silence of the room wrapping around her like a cloak. It was colder here than outside, as though the air itself had been frozen in time. Behind the front desk, an elderly librarian sat hunched over a stack of books, her glasses perched precariously on the edge of her nose. She looked up at Sarah and smiled faintly. "Back again, are you?" she said in a voice soft with age. "Looking for more of the town's history?" Sarah nodded, feeling a cold shiver run down her spine. "Yes, actually," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety building within her. "I need to know everything about Elm Grove's past, the real history. What happened before Maple Ridge was built here?" The librarian raised an eyebrow at Sarah's intensity, but motioned toward the back of the room, where a collection of archives lay stored in dusty filing cabinets. "You might want to look in the old records section," she said, her voice taking on a knowing tone. "The papers from the early days are peculiar. Some things are better left forgotten, but if you're set on digging, the truth's in there." Sarah nodded once more, her mind already racing with the questions she hoped to answer. She made her way past the librarian, who returned to her work without another word. The shelves in the back of the room were filled with ancient file boxes and binders, each marked with faded labels. Sarah opened the first box she found, skimming through the brittle pages inside until something caught her eye. It was an old newspaper clipping, dated from several decades before Maple Ridge was even founded. The headline read, "Mysterious Disappearances in Elm Grove. Town Vanishes Overnight." Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out and read the article. It told the story of how the original residents of Elm Grove had disappeared without a trace. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, just entire families vanishing from their homes in the dead of night. The authorities had no answers, no explanation, only speculation. Some had whispered that the town had been cursed, while others blamed a strange epidemic. But the most unsettling detail was that the disappearances seemed to coincide with the building of a new road through the area, a road that had disturbed an ancient burial ground, an old Native American site that had long been forgotten. The article quoted several former residents, all claiming that something had awakened when the construction began. One elderly man described hearing drums in the night, growing louder as the construction progressed. Another spoke of a strange, pulsing sound coming from beneath the earth, as if the ground itself were alive. Sarah's heart raced as she read the words. The disappearances had been swept under the rug, buried by the government, and the town had been abandoned shortly thereafter. But the connection to the ancient burial ground, the site where Elm Grove now stood, was unmistakable. Sarah continued to flip through more papers, uncovering reports of strange occurrences that had plagued the town's early settlers. According to one account, a group of workers had uncovered a stone monument while digging for the road. The monument was covered in strange symbols, and as soon as it was disturbed, things began to change. Crops withered, animals vanished, and the town's residents began to act strangely, some of them showing signs of paranoia or aggression, while others withdrew into an eerie, emotionless silence. The reports painted a picture of a place consumed by a force that was tied to the very land itself. Sarah found several mentions of a mysterious event referred to as the Reawakening, a moment when the entity beneath the town had stirred, a force that had existed long before the town was founded. The final report she uncovered was the most chilling. It described how the government had intervened, covering up the events and relocating the surviving townspeople to a different location. But they did not destroy the town. They didn't even demolish the buildings. Instead, they left everything intact, preserving it like a museum, but for what purpose? As Sarah read, she felt the weight of the truth bearing down on her. Elm Grove hadn't been built over an environmental hazard, as the mayor had claimed. It had been built over something far darker, something that the government had known about all along. The land was cursed, and the relocations were not just about saving the people from contamination. It was about keeping the curse contained. But why had the government relocated Maple Ridge? And why had they brought the people to Elm Grove? The answers were just out of reach, and Sarah could feel a growing panic rising within her. The symbols, the disappearances, the strange behaviors, it was all connected. But how? And what did it mean for her and Ethan? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned quickly to see the librarian standing at the end of the aisle, her face pale. "I think you've seen enough," the librarian said quietly, her voice low and urgent. "Some things are better left buried, child. You've opened a door that should have stayed closed. It's not just the town that's cursed, it's everyone who tries to uncover its secrets." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew the librarian was right. She had opened something that had been locked away for a reason. But there was no turning back now. She had to know the truth. The air in Elm Grove had always felt a little too still, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. But it wasn't just the atmosphere. Something more tangible, more insidious, was taking hold of the town. Sarah could feel it with every step she took, a constant tension that had settled in the pit of her stomach ever since they'd arrived. It started small, almost imperceptible. A slight vibration in the walls, a faint hum that seemed to thrum just beneath the surface. Sarah had convinced herself that it was just the house settling, the kind of creaks and moans that come with old structures. But after a few days, the sensation grew stronger and the frequency of the pulses increased. One night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a cup of lukewarm tea in front of her. The quiet was oppressive, suffocating almost. The wind outside rattled the windows, but that was normal. What wasn't normal were the whispers. She heard them faintly at first, like distant murmurs just beyond the walls, but as she sat in the stillness, they grew clearer, more insistent. "Sarah." The sound came again, this time louder, closer. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She stood up, her heartbeat quickening, and moved toward the living room. She had to be imagining things. It was late, the house was settling, that was all. She hesitated before touching the wall, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingers. But then she felt it, the wall ever so slightly shifting. A rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through the very bones of the house. She stepped back, eyes wide, heart racing. It was the house. The house was breathing. The ground beneath her feet trembled, a subtle shaking that rippled through the floorboards like a tremor, then faded, only to return moments later, stronger this time. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the house settling. Something else was stirring beneath the earth, beneath the town itself. Sarah's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of what she was experiencing. The walls had moved. The ground had shaken. The whispers had called her name, clear and unmistakable. She had read about the curse, about the ancient force that had slept beneath Elm Grove for centuries, but this felt different. The presence, the energy, it was alive. Suddenly, she remembered the symbol she'd seen at Lisa's house, carved into the doorframe, the same symbol she had seen in the archives, associated with the Reawakening. It was happening. The town, the land was waking up. The next morning, the weight of last night's experiences clung to Sarah like a shadow. She had barely slept, tossing and turning as the echoes of the whispers still rang in her ears. Ethan had awoken early, as he always did, but there was something different about him today. He was quieter than usual, moving through the house in a strange, mechanical way. His eyes were vacant, his once playful demeanor now replaced by an eerie stillness. When Sarah asked him if something was wrong, he simply shrugged and said, "I'm fine, Mom." But she knew better. He wasn't fine. Ethan was changing. His once vibrant energy had dimmed, as if the land beneath Elm Grove was slowly pulling him in, siphoning off his spirit piece by piece. As the days passed, Sarah's suspicions deepened. She began to notice strange behavior in other residents as well. It wasn't just Ethan. People in the town had started to act oddly, more withdrawn, more distant. Some of them, like Lisa, had become almost mechanical in their movements, obsessively cleaning, staring into space with vacant expressions. Others seemed to be losing their memories, repeating themselves in a daze, as though they were losing touch with reality. The pulse beneath the town had already begun its work. It was feeding on the people who lived above it, slowly consuming their bodies, altering their minds, pulling them closer to the earth. They were being absorbed, one, by the ancient force that lay beneath Elm Grove, waiting for centuries to awake. It was then that Sarah heard the whispers again, this time more urgently. She could feel them tugging at her consciousness, calling her toward something, toward the source of the pulse. "Sarah, you must come closer." It was the heart of Elm Grove, the entity beneath the town. Sarah felt a deep, visceral fear rising in her chest. She couldn't explain it, but she knew it now. The heart was awake. It was alive, and it was calling to her. But it wasn't just calling her, it was calling to everyone. To every resident who had been brought here, to every soul that had settled above its cursed land. That night, Sarah's fear became reality. The pulse under the town intensified, the vibrations in the walls and ground becoming almost unbearable. It felt like the earth was shifting beneath her feet, the entire town trembling, as if the land was alive and stretching, breaking free from centuries of dormancy. She couldn't wait any longer. The answers were here, buried beneath Elm Grove. She needed to find out what was happening, and she had to do it before the town swallowed them all whole. With a sense of determination she hadn't felt in days, Sarah grabbed her keys and left the house. The streets of Elm Grove were dark, empty, eerily still, and yet Sarah could feel the pulse deep in the ground beneath her, urging her forward. It wasn't just the houses that were changing, it was the land, the very foundation of Elm Grove, and she was walking toward it. She reached the old town square, the center of the town. The buildings here, just like everything else, looked untouched by time. The same sterile perfection surrounded her, but now it felt like a facade. She could feel the pulse radiating from below, like a heartbeat coming from the center of the earth. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble more violently, and Sarah stumbled, steadying herself against a nearby street lamp. She looked around, trying to figure out where the pulse was coming from when she saw it, the source. In the center of the square stood an old monument, half hidden beneath overgrown ivy. It was the same monument from the town's founding, a symbol of the land's ancient power. As she approached, Sarah could feel the air growing colder, the whispers louder. The monument had been built to mark the land's significance, but it wasn't just a historical marker. It was a seal that had kept the heart of Elm Grove contained. But now, the seal was breaking. The whispers rose to a crescendo in her mind, the voices of the town's lost souls calling to her. Sarah dropped to her knees before the monument, her hands trembling as she traced the ancient symbols carved into its surface. They pulsed, alive with energy, the markings shifting and changing beneath her touch. The heart of Elm Grove has awoken, a voice in her mind echoed, the entity itself speaking through the pulse. We have waited for you. Come, Sarah, become part of the heart, feed it, we will be one. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat, her body trembling as the whispers grew louder, their insistent call drowning out everything else. She could feel it, the heart. It was in her blood now, wrapped around her soul. She had always known, deep down, that this town wasn't like any other. It had never been about relocation, about environmental hazards. It was about feeding the curse that had been buried for so long. And now she was part of it. The ground beneath her feet shuddered violently, and Sarah felt herself being pulled toward the monument, toward the heart. It was all-consuming, and there was no escape. The pulse, the whispers, the land itself, it was alive. And Sarah knew, in that moment, that she had already been claimed. The weight of the truth pressed down on Sarah as she walked through the darkened streets of Elm Grove. The pulse beneath the town had become unbearable, vibrating through the very ground, seeping into her bones, into her soul. It was calling to her, an ancient force that had been lying dormant for centuries, now awake and hungry. But Sarah knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She needed answers. Her first instinct was to confront the mayor. It was he, after all, who had led the town meeting, who had promised relocation, who had assured everyone that it was for their safety. But as she had come to understand, everything in Elm Grove had been a lie. The relocation, the perfect homes, the pristine streets, it was all part of a plan to keep the heart of Elm Grove alive. The mayor had been quiet, almost too quiet, ever since the relocation. The unease in his eyes the day of the meeting was now unmistakable fear. She had seen the way his hands trembled on the podium, the way he avoided eye contact with the residents. He knew something, and Sarah was determined to find out what it was. It was late afternoon when Sarah arrived at the mayor's office, the sun casting long shadows over the town square. The streets were unusually empty, a stillness in the air that mirrored the heaviness in her chest. She had no doubt that whatever the mayor had to say, it would change everything. She knocked sharply on the door. "Come in," came the familiar, deep voice of Mayor Abernathy. Sarah opened the door, stepping inside. The mayor sat behind his desk, his face pale and gaunt. His suit was disheveled, his tie slightly askew. He looked tired, haunted, even as though the weight of the truth had been crushing him for years. And in that moment, Sarah knew he wasn't the one in control of Elm Grove. The town, the land beneath it, had its hold on him, too. "Mayor Abernathy," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. "I need to know the truth. Why was Elm Grove built? Why were we relocated here?" Abernathy's eyes flickered with something that almost looked like regret. He sighed deeply, leaning back in his chair, his hands folding together in front of him. "I was hoping you wouldn't find out this way," he muttered, his voice low and filled with sorrow. "I had hoped we could keep it under control for a little while longer." He paused, as if debating whether to continue, then spoke again, his words heavy with the weight of years of secrecy. "The relocation was never about environmental hazards, Sarah," he said, his gaze meeting hers for the first time with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "It was never about your safety. It was never about saving the people of Maple Ridge. The truth is, we've known about the entity beneath this land for years. The heart of Elm Grove. It's not just a legend, it's real." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "The heart," she whispered, as though saying the words out loud might make the horror even more real. Abernathy nodded slowly. "Yes, the heart of Elm Grove. It's not just a curse, Sarah. It's an ancient entity, a being that feeds on the souls of those who live above it. The town was built over its resting place, and for centuries the land had been dormant, but the moment people started settling here, woke up, The town grew, and the heart began to grow hungry. It feeds on the lives of those who come here, and the government has known this for a long time. Sarah's mind spun, the revelation hitting her like a physical blow. But why? Why would the government allow this? Why build a town over something like that? The government didn't know what to do, Abernathy replied, his voice growing quieter. The heart is powerful, too powerful to destroy, but it has to be contained. The only way to keep it from spreading, from consuming everything around it, is to feed it. Every few decades, they build a new town over it, bring in new people, people like you, and let the heart feed. It's a cycle, one that has been going on for generations. The government has been using people as bait, Sarah, moving them in, feeding them to the entity to keep it from escaping, from spreading. Sarah's blood ran cold. They knew they had known all along. She and her son, Ethan, had been brought here not for safety, but as part of the cycle. They were the next offering to the heart. But why me? Why Ethan? She asked, her voice shaking. Why are we part of this? Abernathy looked at her, his face etched with sorrow. You didn't know what you were walking into, Sarah. No one does. The heart chooses its offerings carefully. It has a way of knowing who will feed it best, who will keep it alive the longest. The relocation was a way of ensuring that the cycle continued, that the heart stayed alive. Sarah's mind reeled, trying to process everything. You, she gasped, her voice thick with disbelief. You've been sending people here, feeding them to it, all this time. How many people, how many lives have been lost to this? Abernathy's eyes dropped to the desk, his face shadowed by guilt. Too many to count. The government has been relocating people for years, using the towns as containment facilities. They don't tell anyone the truth. They make it sound like a public safety measure, like there's some danger to the land. But that's a lie. The truth is, the land itself is what's dangerous. The heart feeds on the souls of the living, and the government has been doing everything it can to keep it from escaping, but it's never enough. It will never be enough. Sarah's mind was racing, her thoughts tumbling over one another. The town was never meant to be a home. It was a trap, a prison, and she and her son had been lured into it. She had known something was wrong from the beginning, the oddness of the perfect houses, the strange behaviors of the people. But she never imagined this, never dreamed that the land itself was alive, hungry, and waiting for them. But there's no escape, is there? She whispered, the realization settling like a stone in her stomach. Abernathy shook his head slowly. There's no escape, Sarah. Once you're part of the cycle, you're part of it forever. The heart will take what it needs. It will consume you, and then it will sleep, waiting for the next cycle to begin. The only thing we can do is try to contain it, keep it from spreading. But even that is a lie. It's a waiting game, and we all lose. Sarah's heart broke as she looked at the mayor, a man who had been just as trapped as the rest of them. He hadn't been in control. No one had. The mayor's voice was softer now, filled with a mixture of regret and helplessness. The heart needs to feed, Sarah, and you and your son, you're the next meal. Sarah's blood ran cold as his words sank in. She and Ethan had been brought here not by chance, but by design. They were chosen to be consumed. The thought of it, the horror of it, was almost too much to bear. But the one thing she knew with certainty now was that she wasn't going to let that happen. She couldn't. With one final look at the mayor, Sarah turned and walked out of the office, the weight of the truth crushing her. But there was one thing she knew now. She wasn't going to wait around to be consumed. She would fight, and she would find a way to free herself and Ethan from the heart's grasp, even if it meant destroying Elm Grove once and for all. Sarah's world had narrowed into a nightmare, a suffocating fog that was slowly overtaking her sense of reality. The more she fought to uncover the truth about Elm Grove, the stronger the pull of the heart became. It was as if the very land beneath her feet was drawing her in, luring her to the source of the pulse. The whispers were louder now, so much louder. She could hear them in the quiet moments, in the spaces between her thoughts, beckoning her. She would wake up in different places she didn't remember going. One minute, she'd be standing in her living room, the next, she'd be in the kitchen or outside staring at the town square as though she had been walking in a dream. But it wasn't a dream. Every time she lost time, every time she awoke in a place she didn't recognize, Sarah could feel it. The heart was watching her. It knew she was resisting, and it was trying to control her. The town, the land, it wasn't just a physical prison. It was absorbing her, bending her will, reshaping her reality. Sarah could feel her mind slipping, her sense of time becoming increasingly fractured. It was like she was being pulled into the pulse itself, like it was luring her consciousness deeper into its grip. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold on to the remnants of her old life, but every second felt like it was slipping through her fingers. And it wasn't just her. Ethan, too, was changing. At first, Sarah had blamed the strange atmosphere, the stress of the relocation, the sudden shift in their lives. But as days passed, she saw the change in him. Ethan, her bright, curious son, was no longer the same. His once vibrant eyes, the eyes that had always held a spark of wonder, now seemed hollow. His gaze was distant, vacant, as if he were looking past her, through her, into something beyond. "Mom," Ethan said one morning, his voice soft and unsettling. It was a tone Sarah had never heard from him before, a tone that was flat, distant, as though the words weren't entirely his own. "You need to let it happen. You can't fight it. We're meant to be part of it." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the words hit her with a chill she couldn't shake. Part of it. She knelt down to Ethan's level, her heart breaking. "What do you mean, Ethan? What's happening to you?" She whispered, her voice trembling with the urgency of a mother's love. Ethan blinked slowly, his pupils dilating unnaturally. "It's already inside me, Mom. It's in me. It's in all of us now." His words were like a knife to Sarah's heart. Her son wasn't speaking of the town in the way a child would. He wasn't speaking about a place. He was speaking about the land itself. He was speaking about the heart. The pulse was growing stronger, and Sarah could feel it pulling at her skin, her bones, her very soul. The walls of their home pulsed along with the beat of the town. At night, she could hear the faint humming in the walls again, growing louder as though the house itself was breathing, feeding, growing. In the quiet of the night, Sarah would sometimes wake in a panic, her hands pressed against her ears as the whispers filled her mind. She couldn't escape them. They followed her no matter where she went. "Come to us, Sarah." The words were insistent, pervasive. She would turn, and the shadows would stretch across the room, following her every movement, closing in on her as if the house itself were alive, waiting for her to give in. And then there were the dreams, or were they dreams? Sarah couldn't tell anymore. In the dreamlike state between waking and sleeping, she would find herself standing in the town square, looking at the monument that had once been a mere relic of the town's founding. Now, in the strange haze of her altered state, it looked like something more. The stone seemed to pulse with a life of its own, and there, beneath the earth, beneath the stone, Sarah could feel the heart beating in time with her own pulse. The whispers were louder now, drowning out her thoughts. "Come to us, Sarah. Join us. The heart of Elm Grove will feed on you as it feeds on all of us. You cannot escape. You are part of it now." It wasn't just the physical presence of the land that was consuming them. The heart was consuming their minds, their memories, their very identities. The longer Sarah resisted, the more it sought to pull her under. She could see it happening to her, in the reflection of her own eyes, in the emptiness that now clouded her thoughts. Was she already part of the cycle? Was she slipping away, becoming something else? The moments between waking and sleep blurred together, and every time Sarah tried to hold on to her sense of self, she felt it slip just a little further out of her grasp. Ethan was changing even faster now. His eyes were darker, his voice lower, almost as if another presence were inhabiting him. Sarah watched in helpless horror as he began to repeat the same words over and over again. "We are the heart lives in us." But it wasn't Ethan anymore. It was as if the land had already begun to mold him, reshape him into something that didn't belong to her anymore. She couldn't reach him. He was slipping away, just as everyone else in the town had slipped away before him. The realization hit Sarah like a blow to the chest. The town wasn't just physically consuming its residents, it was absorbing their minds and souls. One by one, they were being pulled into the heart, reshaped into part of its living organism. The land was alive, feeding, growing, and the longer they stayed, the more they became part of it. But Sarah refused to surrender. She couldn't give in, not without a fight. As the days passed, the pull of the heart became almost unbearable. The walls of the house continued to pulse, the ground continued to shake, and Sarah could no longer ignore the whispers that clawed at her mind. They were getting louder, closer, as if they were inside her head now. She had to leave. She had to take Ethan and escape before it was too late. But as she moved through the house one morning, preparing to make her escape, she froze. Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes vacant and glassy, his body stiff as a board. "Ethan," she called softly, stepping forward. His head jerked toward her, and for a moment, Sarah could almost see the old Ethan in his eyes, the boy she had known and loved. But then the moment passed, and the emptiness took over again. "We are part of it, Mom," he whispered in a voice that wasn't entirely his own. "We can't leave. It's already inside us." The weight of his words hit Sarah like a tidal wave. She realized with horror that it was already too late. The heart had already claimed them, already begun to transform them. There was no escape, not for Ethan, not for her. They were already part of the cycle. And no matter how hard she fought, the heart would eventually take them both. Sarah couldn't accept defeat, not yet. The heart had already consumed so much, but there had to be a way to stop it. A way to break the cycle before it consumed her and Ethan entirely. Every part of her screamed for an answer, for a solution, for something, anything that could stop this nightmare. But it felt as though the land itself was working against her, keeping her in its grip, draining her will. The walls pulsed in time with her heartbeat, the whispers clawed at her mind, and every step she took seemed to lead her deeper into the heart's web. But deep within Sarah's core, a flicker of defiance remained. She wouldn't give up, not without a fight. It was during one of her desperate searches through the town's records that Sarah uncovered a chilling revelation, one that made her blood run cold. The original settlers of Maple Ridge, the first people to have inhabited the land, had known about the heart all along. They had built their homes above it, unaware at first, but once they realized the evil lurking beneath the soil, they tried to stop it. They buried the truth, hid the entity, buried its connection to the land, but that was just the beginning. The original inhabitants had tried to sever the heart's connection to the town. The people who built the town had found a way, a hidden ritual, an ancient method passed down by the indigenous people, one that would sever the land's bond to the entity. But there was a catch. It required a sacrifice, a willing soul, someone who would give themselves to the land, to the heart, in exchange for cutting the entity off from the town. The idea of sacrifice was unbearable, but Sarah knew she had no other choice. She was already marked. The heart had claimed her, claimed Ethan, and soon it would claim everyone else. But the truth weighed heavy on her. Could she really do what was required? Could she really sacrifice herself to save her son and the others? That night, the ground trembled again, the pulse beneath the town growing louder, more insistent. Sarah's mind raced with the possibility of this ancient ritual, a way to break the cycle. She needed to find the ritual's location, the spot where the sacrifice had to take place. As she paced in her living room, the soft sound of footsteps behind her caught her attention. Ethan stood there, his vacant eyes staring at her. He wasn't himself anymore, not completely. His voice was mechanical when he spoke, and every word sent chills through her bones. "You can't escape, Mom," Ethan said, his voice strangely distant. "We're all part of it. It's what we were meant to be." Sarah could barely breathe, but she held her ground. "No, Ethan, you're not part of it. Not yet. We can fight back. We can break free." But Ethan's gaze was empty, like he was already gone. He didn't seem to understand, or maybe he did. Maybe the heart was already controlling him. But Sarah couldn't afford to lose him. Not yet. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Sarah set out to find others who might still have their will intact. She couldn't do this alone. The heart had already claimed so many had slipped away, their minds consumed by the pulse, their bodies becoming part of the land. But there had to be others, people who hadn't yet lost their souls to the heart. It wasn't long before she found them. A small group of people, scattered throughout Elm Grove, still holding onto their humanity. They were different from the others, still aware, still fighting, still holding onto a shred of resistance. They had been watching the changes in the town, the slow erosion of people's minds, and they had realized the truth long before Sarah did. They had been planning, too, just like her, trying to find a way to stop the heart, to break the town's curse. Together, they formed a resistance, a small group of people united by a single goal: to destroy the heart and free the town from its grasp. But as they came together, they realized something terrifying. Every time they made an attempt to stop the heart, every time they tried to break the connection, it only seemed to grow stronger. One evening, after they had gathered in secret to discuss their plans, they made their first move. They tried to disrupt the pulse, to weaken it by digging into the ground, to sever the connection beneath the town. But as soon as they began, the earth trembled violently. The ground shook beneath their feet as though the heart was waking up, feeding on their resistance. They felt it, an overwhelming sense of dread, as if the land itself was fighting back. The people of the resistance were thrown to the ground, their minds overwhelmed by the pulse. Some of them screamed in agony, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways, their faces becoming masks of terror. Sarah could feel it too, the sharp pain in her chest, as if the heart itself had reached out and wrapped its tendrils around her heart, trying to drag her in. "We can't stop it like this," one of the resistance members gasped, her voice shaking. "It's feeding on us. Every time we resist, it gets stronger." Sarah's heart sank. They were feeding it. The more they tried to fight back, the more power they gave it. It was too late. The heart had learned how to use their resistance against them. It had turned their rebellion into nourishment, feeding on their will to fight. Sarah's mind raced. There had to be another way, but it was clear now that their attempts to destroy the heart only strengthened it. The resistance could only hold on for so long before they, too, were absorbed into the cycle. But there was still the ritual, the way to sever the heart's connection to the town. The ancient method that had been hidden away for centuries. Sarah knew it would come down to one final, terrible choice. The group of survivors, now weakened, gathered one last time. Sarah spoke to them, her voice steady despite the terror she felt inside. "We can't give up. The heart wants us to believe it's too strong, but we have one final chance. We can perform the ritual. We can sever the connection, but it will require a sacrifice." Everyone fell silent. "One of us has to give themselves to the heart," Sarah continued, her heart breaking as she spoke. "One of us has to be willing to become part of it to break the cycle." The room was still. No one spoke. No one moved. They all knew what she was asking. The day of the confrontation had arrived. It felt inevitable, like the final chord of a symphony that had been building to a terrifying climax. The tension in Elm Grove was palpable, heavier than it had ever been. Sarah could feel the pulse beneath her skin, a constant, throbbing reminder of the entity's presence. Every step she took seemed to carry her closer to the inevitable, toward the heart itself. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear: the time for resistance was running out. The ritual had given them hope, but they needed to act quickly before the heart became too powerful to destroy. Sarah gathered the remaining members of the resistance, those who hadn't yet been absorbed by the land, those who still had enough strength to fight back. They had all made their decision. They were going to infiltrate the heart's underground lair, the heart of the town, where the entity had lived for centuries. It was risky, perhaps suicidal, but they were willing to do anything to stop the cycle. To destroy the heart once and for all. They made their way through the darkened streets of Elm Grove, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The town, once so pristine and perfect, now felt like a hollow shell, a place caught between life and death. As they reached the edge of the town square, Sarah could feel the air grow heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to make their move. The entrance to the underground lair was hidden beneath the monument in the town square, the same monument that had marked the town's founding. Sarah's heart raced as she approached it, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on her. She glanced at the others, all of them looking as tense as she felt, and then they moved forward, into the heart of the darkness. The tunnel beneath the monument was cold and damp, the walls slick with a strange, organic substance. The air smelled of earth and decay, a mixture of rot and something far more ancient. As they moved deeper into the earth, Sarah could feel the pulse grow stronger, resonating through the walls and the floor, vibrating in her chest like the beat of a drum. It was alive, it was aware, and it was watching them. "We need to hurry," Sarah whispered, her voice strained as the oppressive weight of the underground lair seemed to press in on them. The further they went, the stronger the pull of the heart became. It was as if the entity had been waiting for them, sensing their presence, and now it was drawing them closer. The whispers started again, faint at first, but growing louder, more insistent, as if the walls themselves were alive, murmuring in their ears. "Sarah? Sarah?" She shook her head, trying to block out the voices, but they were persistent. "Come closer, Sarah. Come to us." Her breath quickened, but she kept moving forward, determined to reach the heart before it consumed her completely. As they entered a massive cavern deep beneath the town, Sarah could finally see it. The heart was not what she had expected. It was massive, an enormous, pulsating mass of organic matter, its surface slick with dark, oozing fluid. The entire cavern seemed to throb with its power, the walls pulsing in rhythm with the entity's heartbeat. It was alive, more alive than anything she had ever seen. A blackened, writhing mass of roots and veins, stretching deep into the earth, connecting the town to the land. It was the source of the pulse, the heartbeat of Elm Grove. It was feeding, drawing power from the residents, from their memories, from their very souls. The longer they stayed here, the more they would become part of it. And yet it was aware of them. It knew they were there. "You cannot destroy me," the heart whispered in their minds. "I am the land. I am Elm Grove." Sarah could feel it inside her mind now, its presence creeping into her thoughts, infecting her with doubt, with fear. But she couldn't stop. They had come this far. They had no choice but to fight. She motioned for the others to prepare. Each of them held a strange, glowing artifact, the ancient tool they had uncovered in the archives. It was said to have been used by the original settlers to sever the heart's connection to the land. Sarah stepped forward, the artifact in her hand trembling. She could feel the heart's power building, swirling around her, reaching out to pull her into its grasp. But she wasn't alone. She had the resistance. They were going to end this. But the deeper they moved into the cavern, the more the heart's influence began to take hold of them. It wasn't just a physical force, it was inside their minds. Sarah watched in horror as one of the resistance members, a young woman named Amelia, suddenly froze. Her body went rigid, her eyes vacant, as if she was being consumed from the inside. "Amelia!" Sarah shouted, reaching for her, but it was too late. Amelia's body convulsed as she fell to her knees, her mouth open in a silent scream. The others backed away, their faces pale as they watched her change. Her skin began to twist, her bones shifting under her flesh as the heart's power took hold of her. She wasn't just dying, she was becoming part of the heart, her mind and soul absorbed into its vast, all-consuming mass. One by one, the other members of the resistance began to falter. Each of them was slowly consumed, their minds bending to the will of the heart. Some tried to fight back, but it was no use. The heart was too powerful, its influence too great. They were being absorbed, their thoughts, their memories, their very beings twisted and consumed by the entity beneath them. Sarah felt herself slipping, her mind teetering on the edge of the abyss. The whispers grew louder, the pulse of the heart louder, shaking her to the core. But she couldn't stop. Not now, not when they were so close. Sarah. It was Ethan's voice, but it wasn't Ethan. It was the heart speaking through him. Join us, Sarah, become one with us. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the voices, trying to hold on to herself. She wasn't going to give in, not like this. She had to finish what they had started. With all the strength she had left, Sarah lunged forward, holding the glowing artifact high. She slammed it into the center of the heart, the pulse reverberating through the cavern like an earthquake. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and the heart writhed in agony, its dark veins pulsing wildly. The cavern trembled as the heart let out a deafening scream, a sound that filled the air with a force so intense it seemed to shake her very soul. The walls of the cavern cracked, splitting apart as the heart fought to maintain its hold on the town, on the land. But Sarah didn't stop. She pushed harder, feeling the heart's power trying to fight back, trying to consume her. But this time, she was ready. She pressed the artifact deeper, and for a moment, everything went silent. The heart's pulse began to slow, and then it stopped. The cavern pulsed with life, its walls throbbing like a giant heart, each beat reverberating in Sarah's chest. The air was thick with a suffocating weight, the remnants of the heart's power still clinging to the land. Sarah's fingers were numb around the artifact, the only thing standing between the town and the entity that had consumed everything. It was now or never. There was no time left. She had to act. But as she moved forward, each step felt like she was walking toward her own death. The decision weighed heavily on her. It was the final choice, the one she had dreaded since the moment she understood the truth about the heart. To destroy the entity, to sever its connection to the land, she would have to make the ultimate sacrifice. She would have to allow the heart to consume her, to become part of it in exchange for ending its hold on Elm Grove forever. In her mind, she could already feel the heart's cold, insistent pull, its voice beckoning her. It had been calling her for so long, waiting for her to give in. And now, at the brink of its destruction, it had one last chance to win. Join us, Sarah. You can't escape. You are part of us. The thought made her heart ache. She had already lost so much, her friends, her neighbors, her town, and now her son was slipping away from her, becoming part of this cycle, this monstrous entity. But if she gave herself to the heart, it would be over. The cycle would break. The town would be free. She had to do it, for Ethan, for everyone. But as she moved closer to the heart, something stopped her. A cold dread crawled up her spine and a sharp pang of terror gripped her chest. It wasn't the heart's power that froze her in place, but the realization that something was wrong. The pulse beneath her feet had shifted. The whispers, the pull of the entity, it all felt different. And then she saw him. Ethan stood in front of the heart, his body standing rigid, his eyes vacant, his expression lost. He was no longer the boy she had once known. His face was still his, but his eyes were empty. And yet there was something about the way he stood, about the way the light flickered in his gaze, that made Sarah's heart twist. "Ethan," she whispered, taking a step toward him, her voice trembling. "What have you done?" He turned to face her, his lips curling into a faint, hollow smile, but it wasn't his smile, it was the heart's. "I've made the choice for you, Mom." Ethan's voice was flat, emotionless. "I did it for you so you wouldn't have to. I've already given myself to it. I've become part of it." "No," Sarah gasped, stepping forward, her hands reaching out to him. "Ethan, no, you can't. You don't understand what you've done." But Ethan shook his head slowly, his movements mechanical, as if the entity had taken control of his body. I do understand, Mom. I understand everything now. This is how it was always meant to be. The heart needs us, and we need it. It's part of us. We can't fight it anymore. It's too powerful. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She couldn't breathe. Her mind reeled. She had thought she was the one who would have to make the sacrifice. She had prepared herself for that moment, but Ethan, her son, had already made it for her. No, Sarah cried out, her voice breaking. You can't. You're not you anymore, Ethan. You're not my son. Please, you have to fight this. You have to come back. But his eyes, those hollow, unfeeling eyes, never wavered. The heart had consumed him, had reshaped him into something that wasn't her son anymore. The pull of the entity was too strong, and then it happened. Ethan reached out a hand toward her, his fingers trembling as they stretched toward her face, as if he were trying to comfort her. But the touch was cold, colder than any human touch should ever be. It's okay, Mom, Ethan said, his voice distant, echoing with the heart's influence. You don't have to fight anymore. It's not a curse. It's a gift. We're all part of something greater now. We'll be together forever. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she reached for her son, her arms trembling. I can't lose you, Ethan, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Please, don't make me lose you. For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that might have been recognition, might have been the boy she had raised. But then it was gone, swallowed by the heart. Ethan's hand fell to his side. He looked at her, his expression still hollow, but there was a strange sadness there now. You can't save me, Mom. I'm already gone. The word struck her heart like a dagger. And then Sarah knew. She couldn't save him. She couldn't save anyone. The heart was too powerful, and it had already claimed him. But there was one thing she could do. She wasn't going to give up. She couldn't let the heart win, not after everything she had endured, not after all the sacrifices that had been made. In that moment, she made her choice. Sarah reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out the last remaining piece of the ritual, the final artifact, the one that would sever the heart's hold over the land. The glowing stone in her hand pulsed, its light bright and steady. She held it up to the heart, her face determined. I will not join you, she whispered, her voice fierce, strong. I will not become part of this. I will stop this. You will not take him. You will not take anyone else. The heart responded with a deep, resonating roar. The cavern shook violently, the walls cracking, the earth splitting. The pulse beneath her feet grew faster, stronger, and the whispers filled her mind with unbearable pressure. But Sarah stood her ground, her eyes locked on the heart, her heart pounding with resolve. Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking, I love you. I'll always love you. With one final cry, Sarah slammed the artifact into the center of the heart. The world exploded in light. The light from the artifact consumed everything. A blinding explosion of white light erupted from the heart, filling the cavern with such intensity that Sarah felt her very soul pulled from her body. The ground trembled beneath her feet as the heart writhed, its mass convulsing violently, as if it were alive and dying all at once. Sarah's hands gripped the artifact tight, her fingers burning as the power from the heart pushed against her, trying to bend her will. The earth beneath her feet split apart, sending jagged rocks flying. But Sarah didn't falter. She stood tall, her body shaking with the weight of her decision, but her resolve unwavering. I will end this, she whispered through gritted teeth. For Ethan, for everyone. The air in the cavern grew thick, suffocating, as the heart's pulse began to falter. The rhythmic beat that had once filled the very bones of the town slowed, then stuttered, as if something was ripping it apart from within. The heart was dying, but it fought back. The power in the air grew more oppressive, filling Sarah's mind with painful whispers, voices, so many voices, all begging her to stop, to give in. Join us, Sarah. You can't escape. You are part of us. She could feel Ethan's presence, a ghost of the boy he had once been, floating just beneath the surface of her mind. His voice, weak and distant, called out to her, filled with sadness and resignation. "Please, Mom, it's not too late. You don't have to do this. You don't have to sacrifice yourself for me." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she pressed the artifact deeper into the heart's mass. It was a heart-wrenching decision, but she knew what had to be done. She could feel Ethan's spirit, trapped within the heart, still fighting, still trying to reach her. But the heart was too strong. It had already consumed him. There was no saving him now. "Ethan," she whispered, the words torn from her throat. "I love you, always." In that final moment, as the light from the artifact blazed brighter, Sarah understood. The town, the heart, the land, it had all been a part of an ancient cycle. A cycle of consumption, of death, and of rebirth. But it was also a cycle that could be broken. The artifact was the key, the final link in the chain that had kept the heart alive. And she was the final sacrifice, the one who had to sever the link. The heart let out one final, deafening scream, and then silence. The ground shook violently, as though the entire town was collapsing into the earth. The walls of the cavern cracked, and the dark veins that had once pulsed with life were now still, retreating back into the land. The massive mass of the heart that had loomed over them for so long began to disintegrate, its organic form crumbling, rotting away in front of Sarah's eyes. And then, in a final act of defiance, the town above began to crumble. The buildings shook, the streets cracked open, and the very ground began to give way, the town falling into chaos. The heart had been feeding off the land for centuries, and as it died, it took everything with it. The memories, the lives, the people, all of it began to vanish, fading away into dust, but Sarah remained. The last thing she saw was the town, Elm Grove, collapsing, sinking beneath the weight of its own curse. The homes she had fought to protect, the people she had fought for, all fading into the blackness. She closed her eyes, her body growing cold as the life drained from her. But she didn't mind. She had done it. The cycle was broken. The heart was gone. The town would never again be consumed. The land would be free. However, as Sarah's body began to fade, a strange sensation lingered. She was no longer in the cavern, no longer in the physical world. Her body, her flesh was gone, but her spirit remained anchored to the land. The earth beneath her feet still pulsed, subtle, faint, but it was there. She was trapped within the very land that had once nurtured the curse. The pulse was weak now, almost imperceptible, but it was still there. The heart was dead, but its essence still lingered. Her sacrifice had destroyed the cycle, but it had not erased it entirely. Sarah could feel the earth, the roots beneath, stretching deep into the soil, reaching toward her. The land still held her, still called to her. She wasn't free, not completely. But neither was the heart. She was the guardian now, the last piece of the puzzle. The land, the heart, the cycle, it was all part of her now. She had become part of the land, its protector, its eternal memory. The curse had been severed, but its shadow remained, as did she. As the land continued to shift and settle, Sarah's voice echoed in the wind. "Ethan." Her son's voice answered her, distant and faint, yet filled with peace. "I'm free now, Mom. You're free now. You saved us." And with that, the world above began to heal, the earth beginning to close over the remnants of Elm Grove. The town, once consumed by the heart, would rise again, but this time it would be different. The land would no longer be cursed. Sarah's spirit, though trapped within the earth, had given everything to ensure the future of the town. She had given her life, her soul, to save her son, her town, and all who came after. The heart had been defeated, the cycle broken, but she remained, a guardian of the land, the last sacrifice. The dust settled over Elm Grove like a heavy blanket, suffocating any hope of revival. The once thriving town was now little more than a graveyard for the souls that had been consumed by the heart. The houses that had once stood so proudly, neat and uniform, were now hollow shells of their former selves, cracked windows, collapsed roofs, and overgrown streets where children once played. The sidewalks had begun to crack and splinter, the very ground beneath the town eroding away, as if the land itself was reclaiming what it had lost. The streets were eerily silent. No birds sang, no cars passed by. The only sound was the whisper of the wind as it moved through the skeletal remains of Elm Grove, carrying with it the remnants of a life that had once been vibrant. The town, like its people, had become a ghost, a forgotten memory. Sarah's son, Ethan, lay in a sterile hospital room, his body unresponsive. He was a shell of the boy he had once been. His once bright eyes, full of curiosity and life, were now dull and lifeless, staring into nothing. The machines that beeped beside him were the only indication that he was still clinging to life, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak. The doctors had no explanation for his condition. He was in a coma, a state that was beyond their understanding. His body had not decayed, nor had it shown any signs of healing. It was as though he was suspended in time, alive but not living. Sarah's sacrifice, her attempt to free him from the heart's grip, had only resulted in this. Ethan was lost in the space between life and death, forever changed, forever trapped. In another part of the hospital, the remaining residents of Elm Grove had begun to wake, though their minds and bodies were still haunted by the aftermath of the heart's influence. Some could remember nothing at all, as if their lives before the heart's arrival had been wiped clean. Others struggled to piece together fragmented memories, only to find that their recollections were laced with confusion and fear. The heart had consumed more than their souls. It had eaten away at their very identities, leaving them broken and unsure of who they were. As the days passed, the people of Elm Grove, those who were left, began to rebuild, albeit slowly. The town had become a place of mourning, a place where the past was not just buried, but erased. No one spoke of the heart, of the entity that had ruled over them. It was as if the town had collectively decided that the only way forward was to forget. But how could they? How could they forget the years of suffering, the lives lost, and the loved ones who had been consumed by an ancient evil? The old library that Sarah had once visited, the place where she had uncovered the truth about the heart, was now abandoned, its shelves untouched. The dusty old tomes, which had once carried the weight of history, were left to decay. The town's archives were buried beneath the rubble of the past, lost forever to time. Elm Grove, in all its painful glory, had become nothing more than a memory, a tragedy whispered about by those who had escaped its clutches. The curse that had plagued the town was gone, but its scars remained. The land was forever tainted, forever marked by the heart's insidious hunger. In the hospital, Ethan's condition remained unchanged. His mother's sacrifice had not freed him, at least, not in the way she had hoped. She had given everything to sever the town's connection to the heart, but in doing so, she had lost herself. The town had no closure, it had no salvation. Sarah had tried to save them all to break the cycle. She had sacrificed her life for her son, for the people of Elm Grove, but even in death she was not truly free. Her spirit remained tied to the land, bound to the heart's dark legacy. In the quiet moments, as the wind whispered through the trees, the people of Elm Grove could feel her presence. It was as though she were still watching over them, her love for her son lingering in the air like a faint echo. Months passed, and the town of Elm Grove continued to wither. The remaining residents tried to rebuild their lives, but something was always missing. The heart may have died, but the scars of its existence lingered like an open wound. The town had been forever altered, not just by the curse, but by the choices made in the end. Ethan's coma stretched on, an eternal reminder of what had been lost, of the cost of freedom. His mind was trapped somewhere beyond the veil, his body caught in the limbo of death and life. No one could say what would become of him, or if he would ever wake. Some people whispered that the heart had taken him, that he had become part of the land, just like his mother. Others, though, still held hope. There were stories in the town, tales of the heart, of Sarah's sacrifice, And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind was right and the world was still, people claimed they could hear her voice. A whisper, a faint call carried on the breeze. The town had died, and yet it had not. Its people were still there, lost in the aftermath, in the ruins of a place that had once held life. The land that had once been cursed, forever marked by an ancient force, now lay in quiet ruin. The heart was gone, but the damage it had done to the people, to the town, would never fade. And as the days turned into years, Elm Grove remained a ghost town, a place where memories haunted every corner, where the past lingered in the shadows, and where Sarah's love for her son and the sacrifice she had made would never be forgotten. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows over the ruins of Elm Grove. The earth was still, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the overgrown grass that had once been neatly manicured lawns. Time had not been kind to the abandoned town, but the land itself was stubborn, clinging to its existence despite the decay. The town's name had become a whisper in the wind, a legend passed down by those who had fled, spoken in hushed tones by the few survivors who dared to remember its dark past. But now, the land was stirring once again. A new group of settlers arrived on the outskirts of the ruined town. Their trucks kicked up dust as they made their way down the long-forgotten roads of Elm Grove, unaware of the history that lay buried beneath their feet. These settlers, hopeful and eager to make a new life in the countryside, had heard nothing of the old stories. They knew only that Elm Grove had been abandoned for years, its land cheap and full of promise. They saw potential where others had seen only loss. "We're going to build something new here," a man named Richard Larson declared, his eyes bright with optimism. He stood beside the others as they surveyed the overgrown ruins. "A fresh start for us, a fresh start for this land. We'll make it thrive again." He was joined by his wife, Eleanor, and their 2 children, Sarah, a teenager with a restless spirit, and Tom, a curious boy who found beauty in the simplest things. Along with them were a handful of laborers, eager to begin the task of rebuilding. The settlers had no idea that they were standing on the threshold of a history much darker than they could ever imagine. The first few days passed in a flurry of activity. They cleared away the debris of abandoned buildings, removed fallen trees, and began to rebuild homes where others had once lived. It felt like the promise of a new beginning, a place untouched by the pain of the past. But as they dug deeper into the earth, something stirred below. It was a subtle change at first, a slight tremor, the ground feeling just a little too soft beneath their feet. At night, strange noises echoed from beneath the earth, like the distant groan of something ancient awakening. "Did anyone else hear that?" Richard asked one evening as the settlers gathered around a campfire. "Sounds like the earth itself is alive." Tom, always inquisitive, shrugged. "It's probably just animals beneath the ground. There's nothing to worry about." But even Tom couldn't deny that the land felt different. It wasn't just the crumbling ruins of the old town. There was something about the soil, something about the air that unsettled him. At night, he would sometimes catch glimpses of shadowy figures moving just beyond the reach of the campfire's light, but when he looked again, they were gone. It wasn't long before Richard and his team broke ground for a new foundation near the center of town. As they dug into the earth, they uncovered something unexpected, an ancient stone slab covered in strange symbols. It was buried deep beneath the dirt, hidden for who knew how long. The workers paused, their shovels and pickaxes falling still as they inspected the mysterious find. "This doesn't look like anything from the old town," Eleanor remarked, her voice hushed as she bent closer to examine the symbols carved into the stone. "It almost looks like a warning." Richard frowned. "A warning? This town's been abandoned for years. It's just a slab of old stone. Let's clear it away and get back to work." But Tom, curious as ever, reached out to touch the stone. As his fingers brushed against it, the ground trembled slightly beneath their feet and a low hum vibrated through the air. He jerked his hand back in surprise, his heart racing. "Dad, something's not right," he said, his voice filled with unease. But Richard only shook his head. "It's nothing, Tom. Probably just an old relic. Let's keep moving." As the settlers continued to work, the feeling of unease grew. Each day seemed to bring a new strange occurrence. Tools went missing, strange shadows appeared in the corners of the settlers' eyes, and at night the whispers came soft at first, like a breeze passing through the trees, but growing louder, more insistent. The trees themselves seemed to shift in the wind, bending at odd angles, as though they were reaching toward the ruins of the old town. One evening, as Richard walked through the clearing, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The dirt near the foundation slab had begun to shift, as if something beneath the earth was moving, pushing upward. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. Had the slab caused some kind of disturbance in the land, or was there something else at play, something much darker? That night, as Richard lay in his tent, sleep refused to come. He could hear faint whispers outside, like voices carried on the wind, and then he felt it, a sharp pull, as if the earth beneath him was calling out to him, urging him to come closer, to listen, to understand. The next morning, Richard and a few of the workers returned to the site where the stone had been uncovered. The ground around the slab was still unsettled, and the symbols on the stone had begun to glow faintly, as if they had come to life in the dark of the night. Richard's breath caught in his throat as he knelt to inspect it again, his hand trembling as he reached out to touch the symbols. There was something beneath the earth, he thought, something alive. As his fingers brushed the surface of the stone, the earth shook again, more violently this time. The slab began to crack, deep fissures spreading across its surface. And then, with a sound like a deep sigh, the ground split open. From the cracks, a dark, pulsing mass began to rise. It was ancient, covered in roots and vines, like the heart of the earth itself, alive with the weight of centuries of hunger. The earth began to rumble as it forced its way to the surface, spreading its roots into the soil of Elm Grove. Richard stumbled backward, his heart racing. It was the heart that had consumed the souls of the town before. It had been dormant for years, but now it was awake. And it was hungry. The settlers, realizing too late the danger they were in, tried to flee, but the land seemed to shift beneath them, the town's boundaries growing larger, pushing them back toward the center. The heart was feeding again, drawing them in. It had always been waiting, always watching. The town's dark past, its cursed history, had been forgotten by most, but not by the land. The heart had never truly died. It had only been lying in wait for the right moment, for new blood, new souls to come and awaken it. As the settlers tried to escape, the earth beneath their feet began to pull them down. The heart was no longer a legend, no longer a story whispered in the wind. It was real, and it was feeding once again. The air in Elm Grove grew thick with tension. The settlers, still unaware of the full extent of the town's dark past, continued their work, but now something felt off. The winds whispered through the trees at night, carrying with them faint, echoing voices of the past, of those who had lived here before and had disappeared. They were warnings, but the settlers didn't know how to listen. Richard Larson stood in the center of what would soon be the new town hall, his gaze distant as he watched his workers move around the site. Every now and then, he noticed a strange flicker in their eyes, an emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing day. He had hoped for a fresh start, a place where he could build something lasting, but the land was rejecting them. The heart was waking up, and its presence was felt more every day. It had started slowly, just like it always did. First, the dreams. The settlers began experiencing strange dreams at night, visions of the land, of people, of things that shouldn't be. Richard had his first dream on the second night after the slab was uncovered. In his dream, the earth itself opened, and from the soil rose a pulsating mass, twisting and writhing, its roots stretching deep into the ground, searching for something, craving something. He awoke drenched in sweat, his heart pounding in his chest, but it wasn't just a nightmare, it was real. Eleanor, his wife, had begun to hear whispers in the wind. At first, she thought it was the sound of the trees, the natural movement of the land, but soon it became clear that the voices were calling to her. They were too soft to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading, a voice that she couldn't ignore. "Richard, something's wrong," Eleanor said, her voice filled with fear as she stood by the window, staring out at the land. "I can feel it. It's like something's watching us." And then the disappearances began. Tom, the curious boy who had once wandered the land with the innocence of youth, was the first to go missing. One evening, he had gone out to explore the area near the ruins, and when the family checked the next morning, there was no sign of him. The only trace of his presence was a strange symbol etched into the ground, just as it had been in the past. A symbol that none of the settlers could understand. Soon after, other settlers began to disappear, one by one. Some simply vanished without a trace, while others returned to the town with vacant eyes, speaking in monotones and performing mundane tasks without question. They were no longer themselves. The heart had taken them, just as it had taken so many before them. The settlers were now fully aware that they were not just rebuilding a town, they were rebuilding the curse. The land was alive with memories of what had happened before. The trees seemed to lean closer with each passing day, their gnarled branches like hands reaching out, as if the very roots of the earth were trying to claim them. Richard, desperate to understand what was happening, took a trip back to the ruins where they had uncovered the heart. He and a few others began digging deeper, determined to uncover the truth. As they worked, the earth beneath them trembled again, and they unearthed the remnants of old stone, more slabs, more symbols. It was as though the land had been waiting for them to return, like the heart had been dormant but had never truly gone away. "This is it," Richard murmured to himself as he examined the new slab they had uncovered. This is where it all began. The symbols, he realized, were a warning that they had been blind to. The land had always been cursed, always been bound to the heart. The settlers weren't here to start fresh. They were here to be consumed. They had awoken the entity once again, just like the previous generations had done. They were now part of its cycle. As the heart began to stir, the settlers tried to leave. They fled from their homes, but the land itself seemed to trap them, pushing them back toward the town's center. The roads twisted, the trees shifted, and soon they found themselves back where they had started, surrounded by the ruins of the old town. It was as if the town had swallowed them whole, pulling them into its heart once again. The whispers became louder now, more distinct. The entity was awake, and it was hungry. It fed on their fear, their confusion, their desperation. The settlers' minds began to unravel as the heart's power seeped into their thoughts, slowly erasing their memories, their identities. The land was consuming them piece by piece, as it had done to so many before. In the center of the town, Richard gathered the remaining settlers. They were all there, huddled together, broken, lost. Some of them had become hollow shells of the people they once were, their eyes vacant, their movements robotic. Others still fought, but they were few. "We can't run anymore," Richard said, his voice hoarse. "We've awakened it. The heart is alive again, and there's no escaping it. We've become part of the cycle, we always were." "But what do we do?" Eleanor asked, her face pale with fear. "How do we stop it?" Richard's eyes grew distant as he looked out across the town, the ruins, the land. He realized, finally, what needed to be done. The heart wasn't something that could be destroyed. It wasn't just a creature or an entity. It was a force, an ancient one, bound to the land. The cycle couldn't be broken. It could only be delayed, contained. "The cycle will never end," Richard said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But we can make it stop here. We can stop it from spreading. If we can't escape, we have to contain it. We have to bury it again." But it was too late. The heart had already spread too far, its influence too strong. It was no longer just beneath the earth. It had seeped into the land, the trees, the very air they breathed. They were already lost. The land, now fully awake, began to swallow the settlers whole, like the earth was consuming them, wrapping around them, pulling them into its roots. The once vibrant town of Elm Grove became a fading memory, consumed by time and the curse that had never truly left. The cycle had begun again. The heart had returned, and the land would continue to feed on those who came to disturb it. The story of Elm Grove, once a tale of tragedy, became a myth, one whispered to the new generations. Those who dared to rebuild on the land would eventually meet the same fate. The land was cursed. The heart was alive, and the cycle would continue forever. Sarah's story was now a warning, a legend, a reminder that some places were never meant to be disturbed. The land would always remember. The winds howled through the barren streets of Elm Grove, stirring the remnants of what had once been a thriving settlement. Time had turned the town into a memory, a place forgotten by most, but forever etched into the land. The skeletal remains of houses stood like watchful sentinels, their empty windows gazing out into the void, remnants of lives that had once been full of laughter, joy, and dreams. But those dreams had been swallowed long ago. Sarah's spirit lingered in the earth. It was not a gentle presence, nor a comforting one. She was tethered to the land, a broken soul forever bound by the curse that had consumed her, her son, and the town she had fought so hard to save. The heart, the entity beneath the ground, still pulsed faintly beneath the earth, its rhythm slow but steady, as if it was biding its time, waiting for the next cycle. She had hoped, no, she had believed, that by sacrificing herself, she would be able to end the heart's reign of terror, that the town would finally be freed from its grasp. But as she watched the new settlers come and go, the flicker of hope in their eyes dimmed, she realized the painful truth. The curse was eternal. It was not bound by the rules of the living. It did not care for time or reason, and it would never stop feeding. The new settlers had come to Elm Grove with dreams of building something better. Their optimism was raw, untarnished by the history of the land, but Sarah saw it all before it happened. She watched as they unearthed the slab, as the heart began to stir beneath the earth, its hunger waking once more. The land shifted, the whispers began, and one by one, the settlers fell into the same traps as the generations before them. They too heard the call, felt the pull of the land just as she had, and they too would succumb. Richard Larson, the leader of the settlers, had tried to resist, but like those before him, his will began to falter. The heart had a way of bending the strongest of minds, of weakening the most resolute. It fed on their fears, their confusion, and before long it controlled them. Eleanor, his wife, had become just another pawn in the game, and Tom, the curious boy who had dared to dig into the earth, had vanished without a trace. It was all too familiar. The land was once again feeding. As Sarah watched from the edge of existence, a part of her wanted to scream, to warn them, to tell them that there was no escape, but she could not. Her voice had been silenced by the earth, her body long gone. She had become part of the soil, part of the curse that had been born here long before her arrival. She could feel the pulse of the heart beneath her, its thrum vibrating through the ground, sending ripples of despair through her consciousness. And then, as the days passed, she saw it, the final act of the cycle. The settlers had gathered at the center of town, the very place where the heart had first risen. They had tried to fight, to escape, but it was futile. The earth began to crack open once more, the pulse of the heart growing stronger, louder, until it consumed them all. Their screams filled the air, but they were drowned out by the deep, resonant hum of the entity beneath them. It was a familiar sound to Sarah, a sound that had haunted her dreams, a sound that now seemed to echo through time itself. Richard, Eleanor, and the others were absorbed into the land, their bodies becoming one with the earth, just as she had been. Their spirits would join the heart, feeding it, becoming part of its never-ending cycle. And as Sarah's spirit watched them, her heart heavy with the weight of what had been lost, she realized that there was no end to the curse. It was as much a part of the land as the trees, the soil, and the very air they breathed. The heart could never be destroyed, not by fire, not by blood, not by sacrifice. It was eternal. And as long as the land existed, so would it. The final remnants of the settlers disappeared beneath the earth, and with them, the last glimmer of hope. Elm Grove was once again nothing but a shadow, a hollow memory of a town that had been consumed by an ancient force. The winds carried the whispers of the past, but they would never be heard. The heart, now fully reborn, had claimed everything, just as it always had. And Sarah, the woman who had tried to save them all, was trapped. Her spirit remained bound to the land, forever cursed to witness the cycle repeat itself. She had given everything to stop it, but in the end, she too had become part of the land's twisted hunger. In the distance, the ruins of Elm Grove seemed to sigh. The trees, once twisted and gnarled by the entity's presence, now stood still, silent sentinels over the land. The houses, too, had become quiet, as if waiting for the next generation to come to disturb the earth once more. And one day they would. The land would always call to those who dared to build upon it. The curse would always find a new victim, a new soul to feed upon. It would rise again, just as it always had. Sarah's story, her sacrifice, would become a legend, a warning passed down through generations. But the warning would never be enough. The land would always hunger, always need, always demand. And so, the cycle continued.